There are mirrors that never crack, but lose their clarity slowly, not all at once, not loudly, but gradually, like steam after a long shower, blurring everything you once saw clearly. At first, you notice a fog, then you stop looking, and over time, you forget what your own face looked like when you still trusted it. Confidence doesn't shatter with noise, it fades with repetition. Every time you shrink in a room, every time you nod when you disagree, every time you tell yourself it's not that bad, that's another layer on the glass. And this is how it begins. Not with failure, but with small choices that feel harmless. You tell yourself it's just survival. You convince yourself it's maturity. You keep the peace, even when it burns through your chest. Until one day, you're standing in front of the mirror, and the person looking back isn't someone you trust anymore. You still function. You still smile. You still answer messages and meet deadlines. But deep down, there's a quiet erosion, a slow wearing away of something you once called certainty. You hesitate more. You ask others before asking yourself. You overthink the simplest decisions. Not because you're confused, but because somewhere along the way, you stop believing your own voice was enough. There is a kind of silence that heals, and another that corrodes. One that centers you, and another that empties you without a sound. This second kind, that's the one we need to talk about, because if you've been moving through life feeling slightly dimmer than you used to, if there's a weight behind your ribs you can't name, if the thought of being seen fully feels exhausting instead of liberating, you're not broken, you're just buried, beneath habits that feel harmless, beneath choices that look normal, beneath routines that slowly convinced you to shrink. And the most dangerous part, you don't even notice how much of you is already gone. That is how self-trust dies. Not in fire, not in tragedy, but in silence. And if you don't learn to see it, if you don't catch the moment the mirror goes cloudy, you'll keep walking through life, reflecting everyone but yourself. Let's change that, quietly, from the inside, where the noise can't reach. There's a silence that wears a smile. It walks into rooms. It answers, "I'm fine." It laughs at things that aren't funny, because the truth would make people uncomfortable. You've mastered it. The art of holding everything together while falling apart in the quiet corners no one sees. You show up, you perform, you deliver, but something inside tightens a little more each day. Not enough to break, just enough to make breathing feel like labor. And still, you keep going. Because what else would you do? Who would hold everything up if you paused for even a moment? You tell yourself it's strength, that silence is discipline, that emotion is weakness dressed in louder clothes. But here's what you won't admit. This silence isn't strength, it's fear. Fear of burdening others, fear of being too much, fear that if you spoke the full truth, no one would stay to hear it. So you shrink it. You package your chaos into politeness. You nod. You agree. You disappear in plain sight. And your nervous system, it learns. It learns that your needs are dangerous. It learns that your truth is a liability. It learns that the only safe option is suppression. But suppression is never silent. It speaks in other ways. In the way you avoid mirrors for too long. In the way your shoulders rise, even when nothing's wrong. In the way you clench your jaw at night, as if trying to bite back something that wants out. This isn't resilience. This is erosion. You think you're hiding it well, but your body knows, your soul knows, and the mirror, even if fogged, still catches it sometimes. You see it in your own eyes, that flicker of someone who hasn't told the whole truth in a long time. And yet, there's a deeper tragedy. You've become so good at pretending that you now pretend even to yourself. You say you're tired, but it's not sleep that's missing, it's honesty. You say you're overwhelmed, but it's not tasks that drain you. It's the weight of all the feelings you've locked behind your ribs. You say, "I'm okay," but the echo doesn't sound convincing anymore. So what do you do now? You don't need to scream. You don't need to unravel in front of everyone. You don't even need to explain. You just need to tell the truth to yourself in the smallest way, not out loud, not online, not to someone else, to the mirror, to that version of you still hiding beneath the fog. Say it, whisper it if you have to. I'm not fine. Let it exist, let it breathe, let it burn a little, because pain that is felt passes, but pain that is silenced multiplies. The moment you tell the truth, even quietly, your nervous system notices. It adjusts. It releases. It begins to believe you're safe again, safe enough to feel, safe enough to speak, safe enough to heal. And that is real strength. Not the silence that hides the wound, but the stillness that sits beside it, without fear. Comparison doesn't knock at the door. It slips through cracks. It arrives silently, as you scroll, as you watch, as you listen. It rarely announces itself. Instead, it whispers. It whispers when someone else wins, when they smile louder, shine brighter, move faster, and suddenly, without warning, you forget everything you've survived to be here. You forget your story because someone else's story is louder in this moment. You don't hate them. You're not envious in the usual sense. You're just shrinking, quietly. You compare not out of arrogance, but out of absence, out of a sense that something in you must be missing if others have more. It's not rational, you know this, but comparison isn't logical. It's emotional, it's ancient. It comes from a part of you that still believes value is limited, that for someone to be worthy, another must be less. And when you believe that, you always make yourself the lesser. You see someone post their success, and it steals the joy from your progress. You see someone speak with clarity and doubt your own voice before it even leaves your lips. And worst of all, you do it in silence. So no one can interrupt the spiral. No one can remind you who you are. You carry it like a secret, like a shadow. And that's what makes it powerful, because you never speak it out loud. You never challenge it. You just agree with it over and over without knowing. And each quiet agreement chips away at the trust you once had in yourself. But what if, instead of shrinking when others shine, you let their light remind you that you're capable too? What if you stopped treating success as proof that you're behind and started seeing it as evidence that growth is possible? You've survived things they'll never see. You've walked through storms no one clapped for. You've healed in silence. But that doesn't make your journey less valid. It makes it sacred. Today, when you feel the pull to compare, pause. Notice it. Don't fight it. Just breathe, and then do something radical. Celebrate them, but more than that, remember something you've overcome. Name it. Feel it. Let it land in your body. Because comparison is a habit of forgetfulness, and remembrance is the antidote. You are not behind, you are not less, you are not broken. You are building quietly for what others can't yet see. And when it's ready to be seen, not for applause but for alignment, you'll recognize something rare: peace. The kind that doesn't need to prove itself, because it remembers you've already come too far to doubt your own worth now. You say you're tired, and maybe you are. But deep down, it's not your body that's exhausted. It's your soul, your spirit. That silent part of you that keeps waiting for you to move, but watches you freeze instead. You tell yourself, I'll do it tomorrow. I just need a break. It's not the right time. And on the surface, it makes sense. You've been carrying a lot. You've been stretched thin. But here's the truth beneath the surface, the kind of truth that doesn't shout but still aches. You're not resting, you're escaping. You postpone the hard things not because you can't do them, but because doing them would mean confronting yourself, facing your own hesitation, meeting the version of you that could have acted but didn't. So you stay busy. You scroll, you tidy, you organize things that don't matter, because organizing what does feels overwhelming. And the habit grows. It becomes a pattern, then a rhythm, then a life. You become someone who talks about their dreams more than they move toward them. Someone who collects plans but fears execution. Someone who feels the weight of potential but never quite touches it. And every time you delay, a silent message is written inside you. I'm not ready. I'm not capable. I don't trust myself to finish what I start. It's subtle, but it sticks. And soon, your identity molds around procrastination. You start to say, that's just how I am, as if it's fixed, as if you were born to hesitate, but you weren't. You were born to move, to risk, to step forward, even when it's uncertain, especially when it's uncertain. The cost of postponing isn't just lost time, it's lost self-respect. Because deep down, you know. You know when you're hiding. You know when the pause isn't rest. It's fear dressed as fatigue. And that knowing, it builds tension, not the loud kind, the quiet kind, the type that shows up when you lie in bed at night and feel the ache of unrealized effort. So what now? You don't need to conquer the mountain today. You don't need a 10-step plan. You just need to move, 1 inch, 1 task, 1 action that says, I refuse to abandon myself again today. Not for the result, not for perfection, but for the simple, sacred act of becoming someone who shows up even in silence. Because the truth is, self-confidence isn't born from outcomes. It's built from alignment, from doing what matters even when no one's watching, even when your energy is low, even when your mind whispers, later. Especially then. That's when self-trust is earned. Not in noise, but in the quiet. Not in speed, but in consistency. Today, do one thing you've been postponing. Write the message, take the walk, have the hard conversation, start the project, open the book, close the loop. Do it slowly. Do it tired. Do it anyway, because every time you act, you prove to yourself that you're not a prisoner of avoidance. And that is how you begin to feel powerful again, not through motivation, but through motion, small, uncelebrated, but sacred. Motion that says, I may be tired, but I'm not done. There's a way of living that looks polite, but feels like disappearing. You explain, you over-explain, you wait for a nod before you speak freely. You soften your truth before it leaves your lips, not because you're unsure, but because, somewhere along the way, you learned that being fully you made others uncomfortable. So you adjusted. You learned to filter, to package your thoughts into something less confrontational, less sharp, less real. You became a master at taking up just enough space to be accepted, but never enough to feel whole. And it's not that you don't have opinions. You do. It's not that you don't feel things deeply. You feel everything, but expression became a risk, so you traded it for approval. You began asking the world for permission before stepping into your own life. Is it okay if I feel this? Does this make sense to you? Am I allowed to want this? It's quiet, but constant, a loop that runs beneath every interaction. You gauge their reaction before you finish your sentence. You read their face before you trust your own gut. And with each repetition, something sacred dissolves, your sovereignty. You become fluent in the language of apology. Sorry, just my opinion. Sorry, I didn't mean to overstep. Sorry, I just thought maybe... And yet, you haven't done anything wrong. You're apologizing for existing in full color, for wanting to be seen without translation. But here's what no one told you. When you constantly seek permission, you train your nervous system to believe that your truth is dangerous. And that belief, it shapes everything. You stop making bold decisions. You delay conversations that matter. You defer your intuition to others who sound more confident, even if they're wrong. You become smaller, safer, more acceptable, but never whole. And over time, the world doesn't even need to silence you. You do it yourself, automatically, efficiently, perfectly. Until one day, you wake up and realize you're still waiting for someone to say, yes, now it's your turn. Yes, now you can take up space. Yes, now your truth is valid. Boom, but no one's coming. No one can give you that, because existence was never something to request. It's something to claim, without apology, without rehearsal. Today, say what you believe, even if your voice trembles. Take up more room, even if it feels selfish. Tell the truth, even if it doesn't land well. Not to be loud, not to dominate, but to finally meet yourself outside the cage you've been decorating all these years, because there's no peace in pretending. There's no pride in dilution. There's no confidence in conditional expression. You don't need to be understood to be real. You don't need to be liked to be worthy. You don't need to be perfect to belong. You only need to stop asking for permission and start remembering who you were before the world convinced you to shrink. That version of you still exists, not in theory, not in memory, but right now, just waiting for you to say, yes, I'm still here. You've been trained, not by cruelty, but by repetition. Trained to second-guess your instincts, to smooth out your rough edges, to earn your place in conversations by saying things that make people nod instead of pause. And it worked. You became likable, palatable, easier to digest. But in the process, you lost the flavor of your own truth. You smile when you feel tension. You change your tone mid-sentence if someone flinches at your conviction. You offer disclaimers before offering your opinion. Maybe I'm wrong, but this is just my perspective. Don't take it the wrong way, but what if you stop diluting every word just to make others feel comfortable? What if you let your thoughts land without softening them to the point of invisibility? The fear, of course, is rejection, that if you fully show up, unfiltered, unmasked, you'll be left behind, misunderstood, judged, and maybe you will be. But maybe that's the price of authenticity, letting the wrong people walk away so the right ones can finally recognize you. Because until you stop asking for permission, you'll keep attracting situations that reflect your own hesitation. Jobs that undervalue you, relationships that silence you, circles where you're always shrinking to fit someone else's comfort. It's not punishment, it's a mirror. The world treats you as you've taught it to. And if you've taught it that you need approval before you act, speak, or choose, that's exactly what it will demand. But you can teach it something new, quietly, without drama, without performance, by showing up one day and deciding, I won't explain myself this time. I won't apologize for feeling this. I won't wait to be validated before I move. It doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be consistent. Because confidence isn't built by being louder. It's built by being unwavering. By standing still when everything inside you wants to fold. By holding your truth without needing anyone to carry it for you. That's what makes people take notice. Not volume, not charm, but presence. And presence only comes when you no longer ask, is it okay if I exist this way? And instead say, this is how I exist, full stop. Try it today. Pick one moment, one conversation, one decision, and remove the apology, the disclaimer, the quiet flinch that seeks approval. Let your voice be a full sentence. Let your choice be complete. Let your truth be enough, even if it lands in silence. Because silence, when chosen, isn't weakness. It's power, the kind that doesn't need to be defended, the kind that doesn't seek permission, the kind that comes when you finally realize that you were never meant to ask for space. You were meant to be the space. Somewhere deep inside you, there's a version of you that never asked, never checked first, never waited for the green light before stepping forward. That version wasn't reckless. It was whole. It knew what it loved. It said what it meant. It moved without rehearsing. But over time, the noise got louder. The glances, the rejections, the discomfort in someone's face when your honesty didn't match their expectations. And so you started editing. Not just your words, your very presence, your posture, your dreams. You began to filter your desires through the lens of, will they approve? You didn't even notice when it started. It was subtle, like adjusting the volume on a speaker, barely enough to hear the difference at first. But eventually, you couldn't hear your own music anymore, only the background noise of everyone else's preferences. That's what asking for permission does. It removes the center from your being. You become orbit, always revolving around others. And in that orbit, you lose gravity. You drift. You forget what it feels like to stand rooted in something that belongs only to you. But here's what matters now. You don't need to rebuild your voice all at once. You don't need to become unshakable by morning. You just need to start with one act of unfiltered alignment. One moment where you say what you mean and let the silence follow. One moment where you choose based on you, not the expected, the accepted, or the approved. And when you do, something shifts. Not in the room, not in the reaction, but in you. Your breath deepens, your shoulders drop, your mind quiets because it's no longer negotiating your existence. That's what happens when you stop asking. You begin being, without explanation, without disguise, without delay. And the irony, the moment you stop seeking permission, you start earning respect. Not from everyone, but from those who can meet you as you are, not as you perform. That respect begins inside. It grows quietly, with every choice rooted in truth rather than approval. This is what real confidence feels like. Not loud, not arrogant, but calm, solid, unbothered, like a mountain that doesn't ask the wind if it's allowed to stand. So from now on, no more asking. Is this too much? Will they like this version of me? Do I need to shrink just a little more to fit? Instead, ask only one thing. Is this true to who I am becoming? If yes, stand in it. Let the discomfort rise. Let the silence stretch. Let the reactions fall away, because this is how you reclaim yourself, not by becoming louder, but by becoming undeniably real. You were taught to trust others, their experience, their authority, their certainty. You were told that others know better, that their eyes see farther, that their voices carry more weight than your inner whisper. And maybe for a while, that seemed true. They spoke with confidence. You spoke with caution. They had titles. You had questions. They moved quickly. You hesitated, so you gave them power, not all at once, but in small moments. You let them finish your thoughts. You let them name your feelings. You let them tell you what matters and what doesn't. And little by little, your inner compass grew quieter, not because it failed, but because you stopped listening. You assumed their certainty meant correctness. You mistook volume for wisdom. And every time you ignored your own knowing, you taught yourself that you couldn't be trusted. And that is how self-betrayal begins. Not with dramatic choices, but with the quiet agreement. Maybe they're right, and I'm wrong. Even when your body tensed, even when your heart whispered, this isn't it. Even when everything inside you paused, you overrode it. For the sake of being agreeable, for the hope of being accepted, for the comfort of external validation. But here's what you've started to realize. Even if no one hears it yet, they don't know you better than you do. They weren't there in the silence of your recovery. They didn't feel the tremble in your hands when you chose yourself after years of self-abandonment. They don't carry your story. They don't speak your language of healing. They haven't paid the price your growth demanded. So how could they know what's best for the person they've never had to be? You're not confused. You're conditioned. Conditioned to doubt yourself every time someone else speaks with more certainty. But confidence doesn't always sound like volume. Sometimes it sounds like stillness, like a quiet knowing that doesn't need applause to be true. That knowing lives in you, and it's not new. You felt it before you knew its name. Before the world trained it out of you. It showed up in moments you said no, when everything in the room expected yes. It whispered leave, when everyone said stay. It pulled you toward decisions no one understood but still felt right. That is your inner authority, not loud, not aggressive, but rooted. And today it needs your permission to rise again. There's a kind of silence that follows self-doubt. It's not peace, it's paralysis. You ask a question, but the answer doesn't come from within. It comes from someone else. You search their face for confirmation. You replay their words in your mind before you even consider your own. You walk through your life with the volume of others turned all the way up and your own intuition on mute. This isn't humility, this isn't respect, this is abandonment of the most dangerous kind. Because when you stop trusting your own voice, you become a stranger in your own story. You defer your choices, you outsource your values, you shape yourself according to what they think is right. But who are they? Mentors, family, the voices of strangers who sound confident online. Most of them aren't wiser. They're just louder. And in a noisy world, volume often passes for truth. But the soul knows the difference. It knows when you're betraying your gut for the sake of fitting in. And the body keeps score in the hesitation before you speak, in the tension between your shoulders, in the insomnia that comes when you've said yes to a life you never really chose. You don't need more advice. You need remembrance. Remembrance of the version of you who made decisions without apology, who didn't wait for permission to act on truth. They're still there, not gone, just buried beneath years of deferring. And here's the shift. Trust isn't something you wait for, it's something you practice. Even when it feels shaky, even when your hands tremble, even when your voice cracks, especially then. Because that's when it counts. When the world says, "Are you sure?" and you say yes, even if the yes comes with fear. That's how confidence is built, not from always being right, but from standing behind your choices, even when others don't understand them. You will make mistakes, everyone does, but mistakes made from self-trust teach you something priceless, resilience, while decisions made from self-doubt only teach you to hesitate more next time. So the real danger is not in being wrong, but in never learning who you are because you were too busy being what others needed you to be. Today, begin small. Say what you think before checking if it aligns with consensus. Choose the path that makes you feel honest, even if it disappoints someone else. This isn't rebellion, this is reclamation. You're not here to be agreeable, you're here to be true. And truth, when lived fully, rarely pleases everyone, but it always frees you. You've lived long enough in borrowed certainty, long enough wearing decisions that never felt like yours, long enough shrinking your voice so it wouldn't echo louder than someone else's, and now it's time to return. Not with force, not with arrogance, but with quiet clarity. The kind of clarity that doesn't need an audience, the kind that doesn't ask for permission before it speaks, the kind that simply knows, this is what I believe, this is what I choose, this is where I stand. That kind of clarity isn't loud, it doesn't compete, it doesn't defend, it just is. And when you live from that place, you become untouchable, not because life stops challenging you, but because you stop abandoning yourself when the world does. People may question you, they may doubt your choices, they may offer advice disguised as concern, but you'll listen differently now. You'll weigh their words not as truth, but as input, because you're the filter, you're the center. You're the one who lives with the consequences when the noise fades and only your reflection remains. And that reflection, it's always been waiting for you to return, not as someone seeking approval, but as someone reclaiming authorship. You were never meant to be a follower of certainty. You were meant to be a builder of it, from the ground up, from the silence in. That doesn't mean rejecting advice. It means recognizing its place. Wisdom can guide you, but only you can decide if it fits. Authority can suggest, but only you can choose the direction, because no one else carries your story. No one else wakes up with your heartbeat. No one else feels the exact ache behind your ribs when you betray your own voice. So today, try something radical. Validate yourself, before anyone else does, even if no one ever does. Stand by your decision even if it doesn't get praised, even if it gets misunderstood, even if it leaves you standing alone for a while. Because sometimes solitude isn't punishment, it's purification. It strips away the noise, it returns you to the root, it reminds you your voice was never too quiet, it was just waiting for you to stop silencing it. So speak now, move now, choose now, and watch what happens when the world no longer senses a question mark in your energy, but a period, final, clear, unshakable, because that's what you become when you trust yourself in silence, with no applause, no confirmation, no hand to hold. Just your own breath and the knowing that this time you didn't abandon yourself. The mirror never broke, it just faded, layer by layer, fog, dust, neglect. And in that slow disappearance, you began to forget what your own eyes looked like when they still believed in you. You didn't notice at first because life kept moving, because you were still functioning, because silence became the soundtrack and survival became the rhythm. But deep within, something dimmed. The way you hesitated before speaking, the way you held your breath in crowded rooms, the way you laughed without meaning it, tiny fractures, not in your bones, but in your being. And no one saw it. Because you're good at hiding erosion, you're good at pretending that slow death looks like being fine. But here, in this moment of stillness, you see it. You see the places where you abandoned yourself, the moments where silence wasn't peace, but resignation. The truth. You were never weak. Just tired of fighting for space in a world that rewarded your compliance and punished your clarity. So you dimmed, you bent, you waited for someone to pull you back into yourself. But no one came, because no one can. This part, this return, must be walked alone. It begins with recognition, with looking into that fogged mirror and whispering, "I see you." Not the version others applauded, not the one who learned how to survive, but the one you buried so you could belong. That version, the real one, never left. They've been watching, waiting, holding the line, and now you are ready. Ready to stop performing, ready to stop justifying, ready to stop needing noise to feel visible, because clarity doesn't come from validation. It comes from alignment, when your choices match your truth, when your presence stops apologizing, when your silence speaks power, not fear. So you return to the mirror, not to fix the cracks, not to repaint the mask, but to clean the glass, one layer at a time, with honesty, with boundaries, with movement, even if slow. This is what healing looks like. Not a sudden breakthrough, but 1,000 small reunions with the self you left behind. And each time you choose presence over pretense, you wipe a little more fog from the glass, until one day, you look into it and see someone who no longer asks, "Am I enough?" but instead says, "This is who I am," and that is enough. Not loudly, not defiantly, just truly. There's a kind of peace that doesn't come from fixing everything. It comes from stopping the war against your own voice, stopping the cycle of asking who you need to become to be accepted. You've done that long enough. You've bent yourself into shapes that didn't fit your soul. You've smiled through conversations that drained you. You've stayed where your spirit begged you to leave. Not because you lacked courage, but because you thought that was the price of love, of belonging, of being enough. But what if the price was too high? What if every time you silenced yourself, you were paying with something irreplaceable? Not money, not time, but identity. And what if now, with all that you've seen, all that you've endured, all that you've reclaimed, you could decide no more, not in anger, not in rebellion, but in stillness, a stillness that says, "I am here now, and I remember." Remember what? That you were not born to perform, that your softness is not weakness, that your clarity does not require consensus, that your boundaries are acts of sacred self-respect. This world will always have noise, But silence, the right kind of silence, can be a shield. It's the space where you can hear again, where you can feel again, where you no longer need to explain why you chose to protect your peace. And yes, some people will leave. Some will call your silence cold. Some will ask why you changed. Let them. Because silence isn't absence. It's a shift in allegiance from external approval to internal alignment. You don't owe anyone your performance. You don't owe them the edited version. You don't owe them your exhaustion in exchange for proximity. What you owe is honesty to yourself, the kind of honesty that looks into the mirror each morning and doesn't flinch, the kind that says, I may not be for everyone, but I am finally for me. And from that place, you begin again, not from scratch, but from truth. You speak softer but with more meaning. You act slower but with more certainty. You move quieter but with more purpose. And those who see you now will notice something different, not something they can name, but something they can feel, that you are no longer seeking yourself in their reflection. You've returned to your own. Maybe the mirror never needed to be replaced. Maybe it just needed to be seen again, not as a tool for judgment, not as a test of appearance, but as a witness to who you've become, to what you've endured, to what still remains unshaken. You look into it now not searching for flaws, but for evidence. Evidence that you're still here, still standing, still capable of choosing yourself even when it costs comfort. You see the tired eyes, but also the quiet fire behind them. You see the scars, but also the strength they forged. You see the hesitation, but now you also see the decision forming beneath it. That's the shift. Not from broken to whole, but from unseen to witnessed. You are finally witnessing yourself, not as a project to fix, not as a problem to solve, but as a person worth honoring, even in your unfinishedness, even in your quiet, even in your slow return. This kind of return doesn't happen in public. It happens in silence, in the unshared moments, in the way your posture changes when no one is looking, in the way you say no now, not as a defense, but as a declaration. And this is what no one teaches. Healing isn't loud, it's not dramatic, it's not always visible. Sometimes healing looks like walking away without announcing it, choosing rest without guilt, not responding to chaos, protecting your peace like it's sacred. Because it is. You don't need to prove that you've grown. You only need to feel it in the quiet ways you move differently now. And if the world doesn't applaud, let it stay quiet. Let the silence speak for you. Because that silence is no longer empty. It's full of you, the version of you that finally believes, I'm allowed to take up space. I'm allowed to be whole without being explained. I'm allowed to protect my energy without defending it. I am allowed to exist without asking. And now you carry that with you, not like armor, but like a steady pulse, not like a shield, but like a knowing, not like defiance, but like sovereignty. You will still be challenged, still questioned, still tempted to shrink, but now you have a place to return to, a home that lives within you, built not on noise, but on truth, on stillness, on the sacred decision to no longer abandon the mirror. You're here now, and you see clearly, not because the fog is gone, but because you stopped pretending it wasn't there, and in doing so, you began wiping it away, one quiet truth at a time. The noise won't stop. The world won't pause. The opinions will keep coming, louder, faster, more certain than ever. But you are no longer part of that storm. You've stepped into a quieter place, not because the world changed, but because you did. You stopped looking outward for instruction. You stopped chasing permission. You stopped rehearsing versions of yourself that only earned you proximity, not peace. Now, you know the cost of that noise. You've felt it in your bones. You've seen it in the way your reflection faded every time you chose comfort over clarity. But that version of you, the one who stayed quiet just to stay included, no longer fits. You've outgrown the need to be understood. You've released the urge to explain. You've buried the impulse to perform stillness instead of living it. This silence you carry now is not absence. It is not retreat. It is not giving up. It is presence. It is command. It is remembering that not everything needs to be spoken to be known. You are no longer trying to convince. You are not waiting to be invited. You are not hoping to be seen the right way. Because finally, you've decided to see yourself. And in that seeing, you've remembered something the world never could teach you. Power isn't volume. Strength isn't noise. Clarity isn't consensus. All of them live here, in the quiet beneath the surface, inside the still rhythm of your breath when no one else is watching. So what now? What happens after all this truth has been unearthed in silence? You move forward, not louder, but deeper. You let your presence do the speaking. You let your actions carry your certainty. You let your pauses become louder than their questions. Because people will notice. They won't always know why. But they'll feel something different when they're near you. Like standing next to a flame that doesn't flicker. Like watching someone who's not performing peace, but embodying it. And that changes things. Not for them, but for you. Because once you've touched that kind of presence, the kind that doesn't need defense, you can never go back to seeking yourself in someone else's eyes. You've found something older than approval, something more stable than applause. You've found yourself. And that is a voice that never needs to shout to be heard. You don't need to inspire anyone. You don't need to prove that you've changed. You don't need to explain why you've become quieter, calmer, more precise. The people who see you now will either sense the shift or fade away. And either response is part of your liberation, because silence, when rooted in truth, doesn't just change how you speak. It changes what you attract. No more chaos. No more rooms where your value is a negotiation. No more connections that require performance just to keep the peace. From here forward, you don't enter spaces that cost you your presence. You don't beg to be seen by eyes that were never meant to recognize your depth. You carry yourself differently now, not with arrogance, but with accuracy. You know who you are. You know what you've endured. You know what it took to arrive here without becoming bitter. And that knowing is more than enough. So here is your practice now. Let your yes mean yes. Let your no mean no. Let your pauses be intentional. Let your solitude be sacred. Speak when it adds depth. Withdraw when it protects your alignment. And above all, return to yourself every single day, no matter what they expect, no matter what they project, no matter how loud the world gets. Return to your breath, to your truth, to your mirror, and clean it gently. Not because you need to be perfect, but because you deserve to see clearly. You've lived long enough in distortion, long enough editing your light to fit into rooms built for dimness. No more. If your truth feels like too much for them, they're not your place. If your silence feels uncomfortable for them, they were only ever listening for noise. You were made for stillness, for presence, for clarity. Let that be your new gravity. Let that pull you back every time the world tries to scatter you. And if you must speak, let it come from stillness, not from needing to be heard, but from needing to be real. Because this isn't about finding a louder voice. It's about finding a deeper one. The kind that doesn't rush, doesn't chase, doesn't explain, it just knows. And now, so do you. You've arrived somewhere quiet, not empty, not hollow, but still. It doesn't shout, it doesn't flash, it doesn't demand, it just is. This place isn't a reward, it's a return, a homecoming. A sacred space that was always waiting, beneath the noise, beneath the conditioning, beneath the version of you that thought silence meant weakness. But now, you know better. You've felt the shift, not in volume, but in weight. Your words carry more now, not because you use more of them, but because you need fewer. You move with less haste, Not because you've slowed down, but because you've stopped rushing to prove. You take up space differently, not with force, but with rootedness. This is the energy that changes everything, not charisma, not persuasion, not perfection, but integrity. The kind that says, "This is who I am, even if no one claps. This is what I believe, even if no one agrees. This is where I stand, even if I stand alone." That is the gift of silence. It strips away the performance. It empties the rooms that were never meant to hold you. It reminds you that the only audience that matters is the one within. So now, take a breath. Not to calm yourself, but to feel yourself. Place your hand over your chest, not for comfort, but for recognition. You're here. You made it. And you didn't lose yourself this time, even if you bent, even if you forgot, even if you stayed too long where you didn't belong. You're still here. And that means something. It means everything. Because it means you're still able to choose, still able to rebuild, still able to walk forward, not from who you were, but from who you've become. Let that be enough. Not just in theory, but in the way you breathe, in the way you walk into rooms, in the way you say no without guilt and yes without permission. And if no one notices, good. You didn't do this for them. You did this for the mirror, for the quiet, for the younger version of you who only ever wanted to feel safe being exactly who they are. And now they are, because you are. So let me ask you, not loudly, not publicly, but in the privacy of your own pause, which of these habits was quietly stealing your reflection? And what will you do with that awareness now? You don't need to answer with words. Just a breath, just a shift, just one small action that tells the world, I'm not asking anymore, I'm remembering. Something subtle begins to shift when you stop explaining your piece. You wake up differently, not in urgency, but in awareness. You don't reach for your phone to check the world. You reach inward to check if you still feel like you. And if you don't panic. You pause, because now you know clarity isn't constant. It's something you return to again and again, like a sacred place. You begin to notice small things, not because they changed, but because you did. The way you no longer feel the need to fill silences. The way you sit with discomfort instead of rushing to numb it. The way you speak slower, not out of hesitation, but because your words are no longer for validation. You've entered a different kind of strength, not the kind that impresses, the kind that anchors. And from that place, you start making choices differently. You choose rest without calling it laziness. You choose solitude without calling it failure. You choose boundaries without calling them walls, because now you know that silence is not separation, it's self-honoring. It's the decision to live in alignment even when it disappoints someone else. And slowly, the world around you adjusts, not because you asked it to, but because energy doesn't lie. People feel the shift. They respond differently. Some lean in, some fall away. And both are signs that you've stopped orbiting others and started standing at your own center. It's not about control. It's about clarity. You don't need everything to go your way. You just need to know which way is yours. And that's what this silence has given you, a compass, internal, immovable. So when chaos returns, and it will, you don't match its pace. You slow down. You listen inward. You ask, is this mine to carry? Does this deserve my voice? Will this disrupt my peace or deepen it? And in those questions you reclaim hours. You reclaim energy. You reclaim you. Because now, presence is your filter. Stillness is your strategy. And alignment is your language. No more rushing to respond. No more shrinking to be chosen. No more proving to be believed. You've let all that burn. And what remains is enough. Not in theory, not in potential, but in practice. Daily, deliberate, sacred. This is where power lives now, not in being louder, but in being clear. There's a new kind of discipline emerging in you now, not the one taught through pressure, not the one shaped by urgency, but a discipline born from alignment, a rhythm you don't force, you follow. You begin to realize you don't need to conquer your day. You need to coexist with it, with integrity, and so you do less, but each act means more. You speak less, but each word holds weight. You show up differently, no longer looking for a reaction, no longer scanning for signs of approval. You walk into rooms not to take space, but to hold space, for truth, for presence, for what no one is saying but everyone is feeling. That's power. It doesn't sparkle, it doesn't shout, it simply is. And it's in you now. You notice how different everything feels when you're not chasing time, not chasing answers, not chasing people who never knew how to see you. You stop performing your worth and start embodying it, and the ripple begins. You sleep deeper, because your conscience is quieter. You walk slower, because your choices are more deliberate. You listen better, not just to others, but to yourself. You feel when something is off before it explodes. You adjust early. You course correct quickly, not because you fear falling, but because you now honor the path. The way you manage your energy changes. You no longer give your best to people who treat it as optional. You no longer explain your boundaries. They're not rules. They're reflections of the peace you fought to earn. You stop negotiating your values just to avoid discomfort. Discomfort is part of truth. You no longer run from it. And in that strength, you start recognizing something rare. Your life was never meant to impress. It was meant to resonate with you first. So you wake up each day and ask less, what do I need to achieve? And more, who do I need to remain aligned with? The answer is always the same, yourself. That is the sacred contract now. To be loyal to your own voice, even when the world offers louder ones. To be rooted in your own clarity, even when it costs comfort. To be still, not as an act of resistance, but as an act of remembrance, because you've rushed enough, you've explained enough, you've bled your energy into the hands of people who didn't know what they were holding. Now, you hold it, with reverence, with calm, with hands that no longer shake just because someone doesn't agree. You've reached the other side of noise, and what you've found isn't silence, it's sovereignty. You don't need to be unshakable. You just need to stop handing people the tools to shake you, and that begins with energy. Where it goes, how it returns, what it costs. You used to spend it like it was endless, on conversations that drained your soul, on conflicts that were never yours to fix, on proving things to people who already made up their minds about you. You called it being available. You called it being kind. But what it really was self-abandonment. You showed up where your spirit begged you not to go. You said yes when your body whispered no. You smiled while something inside you tightened. But now, you know what that tension means. It's not rudeness, it's not fear, it's a signal, a compass. And you've started listening to it. You've begun asking different questions. Will this cost me my peace? Am I trying to fix what's not mine to carry? Is this conversation a connection or a transaction? Because you feel the difference now. You feel when your energy is being honored. And when it's being siphoned, and instead of pushing through, instead of people pleasing your way into exhaustion, you withdraw, not with bitterness, but with sovereignty. This is the shift. You stop over-explaining. You stop justifying. You stop handing out access to people who haven't earned your presence. Your silence becomes sacred, not a void, but a filter. Not coldness, but clarity. And you start seeing how many things never needed your reaction. They just wanted your attention. And now, they no longer get it. You don't respond to every fire. You don't rush to every misunderstanding. You don't chase every connection that threatens to unravel in your absence. You allow the unraveling, because some things need to fall apart so you can remain intact. This is emotional maturity, letting things be unclear, letting people be wrong about you, letting discomfort pass through without trying to shape it into something pleasing. Not everything is a cue to act. Some moments are invitations to stay still, and when you do, when you stay rooted, when you stay quiet, when you stay aligned, you realize something powerful. You've become the anchor in a sea of reactions. You don't flinch when misunderstood. You don't beg to be heard. You don't collapse at the sight of disapproval. You simply remain whole, present, unshaken. Not because nothing touches you, but because nothing owns you. That's the difference now. You belong to yourself. You no longer look for mirrors in other people. You've realized most of them are too fogged by their own fears to reflect you clearly anyway. So you return to the only mirror that matters, not the one on your wall, but the one within. You no longer ask, "What do they think of me?" You ask, "Do I feel like myself in this moment?" And that question, simple, sharp, sacred, changes everything. You used to move to be accepted. Now you move to remain whole. You used to speak to be heard. Now you speak when silence would cost you too much. You used to wait for permission. Now you ask your body first, your spirit second. The rest is noise. There's a version of you that used to shrink for the sake of peace, used to agree just to stay included, used to explain yourself until your soul was exhausted from trying to be digestible. But that version is gone now. Not hated, not judged, just released. You've stopped apologizing for how deeply you feel, for how often you need quiet, for how you walk away from chaos without needing to announce your exit. And in that walking, you've returned to yourself, not the version dressed for the world, the original, the one that existed before you were told to earn your place in rooms that never saw your worth. And when you return, you don't find perfection, you don't find clarity in every corner, you find truth, honest, unpolished, enough. You begin to live slower, speak less, feel more, and the world around you starts to shift. You don't tolerate the weightless conversations anymore. You don't chase the shallow praise. You don't pretend you're fine when you're bleeding inside, because now you understand your silence was never the problem. Your pretending was. And without the pretending, what's left is power. The quiet kind, the kind that walks into a room and doesn't ask to be understood. It simply is. You don't need to say, "I've changed." Your energy says it for you. Not louder, just more certain, more grounded, more you. So you move through the world now, not looking for where you fit, but checking moment by moment. Does this feel honest? And if it doesn't, you walk away, not with anger, but with peace. Because now you no longer abandon yourself to be chosen. You choose yourself first and let everything else respond accordingly. You don't walk the same anymore, not because your steps are louder, but because they're yours. Fully, deliberately, finally. Every movement now comes from a place you once abandoned, your own center. You used to pivot constantly, to adapt, to adjust, to shapeshift into someone that wouldn't cause discomfort. But now you know, discomfort isn't danger, and peace doesn't come from being palatable. It comes from being true. So you let the discomfort rise, you let silence stretch between you and the world. You let people sit with your no without softening it into a maybe. You stop softening what was never meant to be soft. Your truth, your boundaries, your presence, and something beautiful happens when you do. You become consistent, not in what you do, but in who you are. The need to convince vanishes. The need to rehearse disappears. You no longer seek alignment through others. You are the alignment now. And the people around you? Some drift, some tighten their grip, some grow quiet, confused by your stillness, unsettled by your clarity. But you don't chase anymore. Not because you don't care, but because you finally do. You care too much about your peace to keep paying for the comfort of others with the currency of self-betrayal. You've learned that not everything lost is a loss, that absence can be healing, that solitude can be sacred, and from that solitude you've grown roots, not just ideas, not just insights, roots. They keep you steady when your old patterns try to pull you back, when the noise calls, when the doubt whispers, when the past asks for a return visit. But you're not returning, you're remembering. And there's a difference. Remembering is not nostalgia, it's reclamation. It's taking what was once fragmented and holding it whole. So now you hold your presence differently, not tightly, not defensively, but with quiet confidence. You don't enter rooms needing to be received. You bring the energy of someone who already received themselves, and that energy doesn't demand. It doesn't chase, it doesn't explain, it invites. And whatever or whoever cannot meet you here is free to leave. Because you're not performing your worth anymore. You're embodying it. You don't arrive with noise. You don't need it anymore. What once felt like strength, the noise, the defense, the reaction, now feels like distraction. And what once felt like weakness, silence, stillness, solitude has become your ground, your rhythm, your truth. There's no celebration here, no confetti, no round of applause, only breath, only presence, only the quiet, steady knowing that you are no longer living against yourself. You move through your life now with a sacred economy. You don't waste your words. You don't waste your time. You don't waste your energy trying to fix things that break every time you return to them. You've accepted what must be left behind, not because you're cruel, but because you're clear. Clarity has become your compass, and with it comes grief. Not all healing is light. Sometimes growth feels like standing at the edge of everything you used to need and walking away without looking back. You've buried the version of you who begged to be chosen, who explained her silence, who apologized for needing rest, who confused loyalty with self-erasure. And in her place, you've risen, not higher, just deeper, rooted in presence, grounded in restraint, anchored in something that can't be shaken by opinions or absence. And from this depth you begin again, not in public, not on display, but in the smallest, quietest ways. You choose what honors you. You pause when others expect urgency. You say no without guilt. You say yes without performing joy. You live from alignment. You protect it like something sacred, because now you know it is. And those who meet you now will feel it. They won't know why your presence unsettles their performance, but they'll sense the difference. You don't rush to fill the silence, you let it stretch, you let it speak, because now you understand what you hold in your stillness is more powerful than anything you ever shouted in your defense. You don't chase closure, you are the closure. Your presence ends what your words never could. So if this is the end of a chapter, it's also the beginning of something unshakable. You, in your full presence, with no mask, no explanation, no performance. Just this, a person who finally came home to themselves. So here you are, no longer chasing, no longer performing, no longer asking for permission to feel, to speak, to be. You've walked through silence and learned that it doesn't mean absence, it means presence, the kind that no one can give you and no one can take away. You've watched your old habits dissolve, not with force, but with awareness. You stopped pretending you were fine. You stopped comparing your timeline to someone else's illusion. You stopped deferring your life to avoid temporary discomfort. And in place of those habits, something else grew. Roots, stillness, sovereignty. You don't need to announce that you've changed. The energy speaks, the breath speaks, the way you say nothing when you used to beg, that speaks. Now you live slower, but with more depth. You speak less, but with more truth. You trust more, not because the world became safer, but because you did. safer to yourself, more loyal, more honest, more willing to sit in discomfort rather than sell yourself for comfort. You've returned to your place, not a destination, a state, a quiet one, a powerful one. And now that you're here, really here, you see what you couldn't before, that nothing outside of you will ever be more important than what you protect inside. So keep protecting it, not with walls, but with presence. Not with noise, but with truth. Not to prove anything, but to remain intact. And now I leave you with a question, not to answer out loud, but to carry inward, into the silence you've reclaimed as sacred. What part of you was quietly asking to be seen, and now finally feels safe enough to return? You don't need to respond in words. Sometimes presence is the answer, but if something here touched you, leave a symbol, a dot, a space, a sign that you're still here, not for anyone else, but for the version of you who waited patiently in silence for you to come back home.